Hi there, this is Peter from Courtyard Productions. I hope you enjoyed this film. KLM was founded in 1919 and is one of the world's oldest airlines. Started by the charismatic Albert Plesman, post-World War II, KLM was the first European carrier to recommence transatlantic services. Merged since 2003 with Air France, the merger has resulted in the world's largest airline group. During the research for my book Falling Stars, 2 KLM crashes took place within the broad 1945 to 1961 timeframe. The Triton in 1954 and the Hugo de Groot in 1958. While it became abundantly clear that aviation in this period was often a very risky proposition, it was impossible to ignore the sheer scale of KLM accidents across these 15 years. The purpose of this short film is to look at the KLM accident history in these fledgling years of international airline operations. If you have any comments or observations, we'd love to hear from you. In the meantime, Falling Stars is available from pilot.ie. Talk to you soon. Okay, so our story starts on the 26th of January 1947. So this is a flight that's been operated by a Douglas DC-3, which was a workhorse aircraft of KLM at the time. Now the flight started at Amsterdam's Schiphol Airport. It flew to Kastrup Airport in Copenhagen and was destined for a final landing at Stockholm Airport. On board, 6 crew and 16 passengers. Less than 1 minute after takeoff from Kastrup Airport, while climbing to a height of 200 feet with a 40-kilometre wind from the northeast, the aircraft nosed down and crashed to the huge explosion in a snow-covered field located 1,000 metres from the airport. The aircraft was destroyed by the impact and a post-crash fire, and all 22 occupants were killed. Among them, Prince Gustav Adolf of Sweden, grandson of King Gustav V, and the US singer Grace Moore. It was determined that the loss of control during initial climb was caused by the stabilizers blocked by a wooden lock pin. During the stopover in Copenhagen, a ground technician decided to put a lock pin in the rudder and the stabilizer as well to avoid unnecessary movements that would cause damage in winds. The next crash was at Prestwick Airport, which is just due south of Glasgow in Scotland. This was a KLM Lockheed Constellation which crashed on approach to Glasgow Prestwick Airport, killing all 40 occupants, passengers and crew. The Constellation was named Nijmegen and departed Amsterdam at 21:11 on a transatlantic flight to New York, with an intermediate stop at Prestwick in Scotland. Arriving in Prestwick, the aircraft was vectored for a ground-controlled approach to runway 32. The pilot, however, wanted to try a visual approach to runway 26. After having overshot runway 32, the aircraft entered the runway 26 downwind leg. At an altitude of approximately 440 feet, the aircraft struck high-tension cables, plane caught fire and completed a left-hand turn before crashing. The captain of the flight was a well-known KLM pilot called Dirk Parmentier, who had flown KLM's DC-2 during the London-Melbourne air race of 1934. The inquiry discovered that the accident was likely caused by the crew's reliance on a combination of erroneous charts and also incomplete weather forecasts, causing the crew to become distracted and disorientated in the inclement conditions. The aircraft hit high ground and impacted with an electricity pylon. So, moving along, June the 23rd, 1949, a Lockheed Constellation, a 749 model, registration Echo Romeo, is making its way from Jakarta through Port Louis. It has come through Cairo and it's now heading into Amsterdam. The 4-engine aircraft christened Roermond left Cairo at 5:08 local time. On board 22 passengers and crew. While cruising along the East Italian coast at an altitude of 5,000 meters approximately, the aircraft went out of control and entered into a dive. During the vertical descent, the tail broke off. The aircraft came upside down and eventually crashed into the Adriatic Sea, approximately 1.5 kilometers from the lighthouse at Bari. The wreckage sank in 35 meters of water and very, very little debris was recovered. It was particularly poignant for the founder of KLM, Albert Plesman, as his second son, Johann Cornelius Plesman, was on board and he lost his life. It was particularly bitter as well because another son had been lost in a Spitfire accident during World War II. As only few debris was found, investigations were unable to determine the exact cause of the accident. Nevertheless, it was the opinion of the experts that the loss of control may have been caused by a failure of the automatic pilot system. On the 12th of July 1949, a KLM Lockheed 749 Constellation was attempting an approach into Bombay in monsoon weather and flew below the minimum safe altitude into nearby hills, killing all 45 passengers and crew on board. The investigation put the blame down to pilot error. It's probable that the aircraft was on a GCA approach as Bombay was equipped with an ILS in 1949. The aircraft passengers included several journalists from the United States who had been invited by the Dutch government to conduct independent investigations into the Dutch East Indies as a result of tensions between the Dutch and the rising independence movement now within Indonesia. As always, there are conspiracy theories, but the main fact seems to be the aircraft pranged in bad weather, unfortunately not a common event in those days. The captain was Velager van Kooi. He was experienced and had flown into Bombay on several previous occasions. And this is the part that beggars belief, because the journalists that were on board the aircraft, the Franeker, were only brought out to Indonesia just a few weeks earlier by another ill-fated KLM Constellation called the Roermond. You couldn't really make this stuff up. Okay, moving along. KLM Flight 592 was a Douglas DC-6 and was a scheduled passenger service between Rome and Frankfurt International Airport. On Saturday, the 22nd of March 1952, Flight 592 crashed on final approach to Frankfurt around 10:45 a.m. and 45 of the 47 people on board were killed. Around 10:38 a.m. local time, the crew of Flight 592 contacted Frankfurt Air Traffic Control and reported they were overhead the Staten beacon at approximately 4,000 feet. 7 minutes later, at around 10:45 a.m, the crew reported that they were approaching the Offenbach beacon and descended to 2,460 feet. Nothing more was heard from the flight after this. Around 5 minutes later, the aircraft crashed into a forest. Of the 47 people on board, 45 did not survive the crash. The survivors were one crew member and one passenger. The cause of the crash was not determined, but it was possible that the crew continued the approach below the minimum descent altitude to maintain a visual contact with the ground. Okay, next up, KLM Flight 608 was an international scheduled passenger flight from New York City to Amsterdam. The 23rd of August 1954, the aircraft crashed in the North Sea during the Shannon-Amsterdam leg of the flight. The crash killed all 21 passengers and crew on board. The Douglas DC-6B was christened the William Bonteco, and the aircraft's registration was Foxtrot Oscar. At 9:29 GMT, the flight 608 left Shannon Airport bound for Amsterdam Airport Schiphol. The weather at the time was poor with low clouds and heavy rain. 2 hours later, the aircraft was cleared to descend to 5,000 feet to prepare for landing. This was eventually changed to 3,500 feet. At 11:35 a.m., air traffic controllers cleared flight 608 to descend to 2,500 feet but received no response. After an extensive search, floating debris from the aircraft was found at 1610 off the Dutch coast near Bergen. Now, witnesses on the ground noticed the aircraft was behaving strangely. Some reported hearing the aircraft pass overhead where the Green 2 airway crossed the coast, and others reported seeing the aircraft passing at shortly after 12, passing overhead at low altitude and heading back out towards sea. Yet others reported hearing a loud bang over the water, possibly from an explosion. Okay, KLM Shannon. So moving on to 1954, KLM Flight 633 was operating a service between Schiphol in Amsterdam, flying on to Shannon for a further flight to Gander and then onwards to Idlewild Airport in New York. The name of the aircraft was called the Triton, and it was being flown by one of KLM's most senior captains, a guy called Adrian Vereuille. Now, the book Falling Stars deals with the Shannon air crashes, and there is a lot of information in the book concerning this particular crash. It's infamous in the Shannon area, but I won't go into it in huge detail. I will put some links to several documentaries I have done on the Triton down below, so check that out later on. The aircraft was refueled in Shannon, and the plane took off on its transatlantic leg. There were 46 passengers and 10 crew on board. Shortly after takeoff, Vereuille reduced the power from maximum to METO, which is maximum except takeoff. The pilot was unaware that the landing gear was not retracted, and as a result, the aircraft descended to touchdown in the Shannon estuary. It turned around in impact and broke into two sections. The aircraft was partially submerged, and at least one of the fuel tanks ruptured during the crash. The fuel fumes rendered many passengers and crew unconscious, who then drowned in the rising tide. Even though the crash occurred less than 1 minute after the plane took off from Shannon Airport, authorities in Shannon remained unaware of the disaster until the mud-caked third pilot navigator of the craft, Johan Tiemann, stumbled into the airport and reported, "We've crashed," and that was a full 2.5 hours before the plane made its final impact. KLM Flight 844 was an international scheduled flight from Biak Mokmar Airport in Dutch New Guinea, now Indonesia, to Manila in the Philippines, and it took place on the 16th of July 1957. The aircraft crashed into a bay 1.2 kilometers from its departure airport. As a result, 58 out of the 68 on board perished. The flight was the first leg of a service with the ultimate destination of Amsterdam in the Netherlands. The aircraft, a Lockheed Super Constellation, registered Kilo Tango and christened Neutron. After takeoff at 3:32 in the morning of the 16th of July 1957 from runway 10 at Biak Airport, the captain, strangely, of KLM Flight 844 requested that the runway lights be kept on and permission to carry out a low pass down the runway, with both requests being granted. The Super Constellation initiated a 180-degree turn, losing altitude during the turn until it struck the sea at 3:36, breaking apart and sinking in water with depths of up to 820 feet. Initially, the crash was attributed to pilot error and or technical failure, with no direct evidence for either cause. As the accident happened at night, the pilot might have misjudged his altitude relative to the sea. The summary of the report from the accident board noted that there was no evidence of either pilot error or technical failure, but also noted the risks involved in takeoff and landing should not be needlessly increased by carrying out low passes on scheduled services with passengers on board. KLM Flight 607E was an international flight that crashed on the 14th of August 1958 after taking off from Shannon Airport in Ireland. The aircraft was a Lockheed Super Constellation. All 99 on board died, making it the deadliest civil aviation disaster involving a single aircraft at the time. Now, the story of the Hugo de Groot is covered extensively in my book Falling Stars and is also supported by separate documentaries on this channel, so I'll post the links below. The aircraft departed Shannon, flight 607, at 3 on the second leg of a transatlantic trip from Amsterdam, Netherlands to New York. Radio contact with the aircraft was lost approximately at 3:40. Rescue operation was launched, which found light debris on the surface of the ocean approximately 110 miles northwest of Shannon. The remains of 34 of those on board were also discovered. Due to the lack of evidence, Irish and Dutch investigators could not pinpoint the probable cause of the accident. They examined the possibility of a bomb, electrical failure or pilot error, but believed that the most likely possibility was a catastrophic mechanical failure. KLM Flight 823 was an accident in 1961 involving a Lockheed L-188 Electra aircraft, which crashed on approach to Cairo International Airport in Egypt after a flight from Rome in Italy. The crash killed 20 out of the 29 passengers and 7 crew on the flight. The accident was an American-built Electra, registration Lima Mike, built in 1960. At 4:11 local time, the aircraft was on approach to runway 34 at Cairo International Airport, but struck high ground about 4 kilometers south of the airport. The aircraft broke up on impact, with both sections catching fire. 17 passengers and 3 crew were killed. The cause of the KLM Flight 823 crash was attributed to pilot error, being blamed on the pilot in command not paying sufficient attention to his instruments. Is it possible for a person or a company to run into a very, very extended period of bad luck? I think so. Anything is possible in a life. And certainly the 1945 to 1961 KLM accident picture makes for some very, very interesting reading. There were some things that struck me as I got to the end of this edit. First of all, the crash in the North Sea and the crash in Shannon, both in 1954, only 2 weeks apart. Then you had a direct relationship between the crash in Bari in Italy and very shortly after another crash in Bombay in India. Just tragic that the American journalists who were traveling on board the aircraft which crashed in Bari was the same aircraft which took him to Indonesia, and then they were killed obviously on the way back. It was just really, really tragic, and it's something very embarrassing for the Dutch government and for KLM. Some bizarre crashes in the mix. I couldn't believe what happened in New Guinea at Biak Airport when I first discovered this. Truly extraordinary for a captain in command following a successful takeoff to want to circle around and show the passengers or somebody on board the lights of the airport. That is truly, truly strange. Anyway, this is I'm sure, a rough guide as to the accidents within KLM in this period. If I've forgotten anything, just let me know. I know that there was several training accidents. I have elected not to cover these, and if you want to research them, please be my guest. So if you have any comments, leave them down below. I've placed links to the previous documentaries on several of the KLM crashes. So in the meantime, if you like the channel, feel free to hit like and subscribe. And wherever you are, take care. Talk to you soon.